I'm Frank Rimalovski. I'm the executive director of the NYU Entrepreneurial Institute, which is an organization inside of NYU that does a whole rash of things to help our students and faculties and researchers across the university get started with startups. We run a venture fund and do a whole host of other things. One of the other things I have the privilege of doing is serving as an instructor for the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program, which is a program that actually puts lean startup into practice, teaching scientists and engineers that have been funded by the National Science Foundation how to commercialize their research, again, using lean. And out of that grew a book that I helped co-author called Talking Humans. And I'm not here to do an infomercial for the book, but I do want to share some of the principles for that. But I will say now, we don't, neither Giff Constable, my co-author, nor I make any money off the book. So we actually put it out into the public. It's for free, and hopefully it'll be something that you'll all learn from that. If not, tell me that as well. Before I get started though, I'd love to know a little bit about who's here. I'm not going to ask just too many people here to introduce themselves, but who's an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur working on a startup? Okay, how many of you work in a corporate environment where you're trying to adapt or adopt lean principles? How many people are doing something like that in a university context? And what are the groups that I leave out? Who else is here? Anyone? Or is that everyone?
That's good. We work at a growth stage technology company.
Okay. So not a big company, not a startup, somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between.
All right, cool. So I also want to try to keep this interactive. There actually is an exercise. This was supposed to be billed as a workshop, so I want to try to live up to that. If the blank pieces of paper that are supposed to show up in the next 20 to 30 minutes do show up, then we'll do that. If not, we'll audible. So this is a diagram that I imagine, I hope, most of you have seen in one form or another. These are the 4 stages of the customer development methodology that Steve Blank defined in his book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, several years ago, many years ago now. And you know, it should look familiar even if you actually haven't seen it before, but the 4 steps really define, as customer validation, where you're testing your assumptions about the customer needs and problems and beginning to develop those minimally viable products. Customer validation, where you're beginning to seek validation that people are interested in your product or service or business. And that first half is defined as the search, the second half the execution, customer creation, when you're beginning to build customer demand and improve the efficiency by which you're acquiring customers, and then company building or scaling and growth where you're aggressively driving. So it's kind of the search and the execution. When people talk about lean, and this is really the core element of lean, if you will, or a core element of lean, right? People often jump to this phase. They want to, ship a product or minimally viable product and get people to test it. And they often overlook this first phase. And that's really when you're getting to understand your customer needs. And the definition that I like to use of lean, which actually traces back to Peter Drucker when his teachings were adopted by the Toyota production system back in the 50s, was lean was defined as minimizing waste, where waste is defined as things that don't add value to the customer. So you really need to understand what your customer needs before you build or really do anything, and that's really what this talk is about, is how you put that into practice. And what I want to do is share some ideas, tips, tricks for how to actually best do customer discovery. Okay, one of the other mistakes, even if people embrace this, when they first want to go out, the first thing they want to do, either they object and say something like this, right? That you can't just ask customers what they want and then try to give it to them. Well, that doesn't sound like discovery necessarily, and that's not what I'm That's the word I'm looking for. Advocating. But I'm actually advocating something more like this, which Steve Jobs also said. That new ideas come from watching something, talking to people, experimenting, asking questions, and getting out of the office. And I think Steve said this long before the other Steve said, get out of the building. So it's really important that you go in with an open mind and with the intent to learn, not simply to jump to validation. Now, one of the ways that we like to do this, both at NYU and in the I-Corps program, is actually to start out by having entrepreneurs capture all their hypotheses in some way, shape, or form. And the tool that we like to use is the business model canvas. You don't have to use the business model canvas, okay? Though I'm a big fan of it. Alex Osterwalder was here a moment ago. But it's a good way to help you think about, particularly, I find in a university context, it's really helpful to help entrepreneurs think beyond the product. And that's actually one of the great benefits of using the business model canvas. It helps you define all the different elements of your business and how they interact together. But it's really important that you articulate all those different hypotheses for all the different customers that you might have. And to do that up front. Okay, the important thing to remember though, is you can spend a lot of time doing this, but actually half of the assumptions, probably actually more than half of the assumptions are wrong. In fact, my friend Kira Davis was just on stage here a moment ago and said they have data from 1,000 different cohorts that have used lean in academic, corporate, and government environments. And they have a total of 62,000 hypotheses that those 1,000 cohorts have tested using the lean methodology. 37,000 of them were wrong. So I guess that means I was right. And I made this slide before I even had that data. But it's true. But the problem is that any one of those assumptions has the capability of absolutely killing your business. So it's really important to get out and test those early. But I remind entrepreneurs that the key thing is for them, their job is not to validate their product. It's not to find a home for your product or technology. It's to validate the problem and how to best solve it. Okay, and that's a really important distinction. Or put another way, to test the problem first, then you can test your solution. Does that make sense? Okay. So how do you actually go about doing that? And that's what I really want to spend the rest of the time talking about. The method that we use, okay, Eric Ries talks about this all the time, right? Using the scientific method. So just a quick refresher for those of you who've been out of high school science classes for a long time, right? The scientific method looks something like this. You observe a phenomenon. You formulate a hypothesis. You test that hypothesis via rigorous experiments. If the data suggests that you're wrong, you rehypothecate or you modify your hypothesis, conduct more experiments until you can establish a theory based on the repeated validation of results. And while that sounds very highfalutin, it's actually relatively simple. It's really about defining experiments, defining hypotheses, conducting experiments, and then observing your results. The difference when we apply this in a business context, rather than modifying your hypothesis or rehypothecating, we pivot. Okay? And that's really what a pivot is. A pivot is not a restart. It's not junking your product. It's simply one change in one of your core assumptions of your business model. Okay? And that could be who your customer is, what your value proposition is, your revenue model, how you keep and grow customers, whatever. So, a couple of thoughts on defining those hypotheses up front. It's really important that your hypotheses must, think about this for a second, right? For anybody here a scientist or engineer in any way, shape, or form, right? It's really important that you have good hypotheses because that informs the types of experiments that you do. Same is true here. So your hypotheses must be falsifiable. Okay? Something like our product will spread through word of mouth really ain't too great. Okay? What you want is something more like our viral coefficient over the next 2 months will be greater than 0.5. Okay, something that you can test, get specific outcomes, and then measure whether or not you achieved that, it also nicely bounds the time frame that you're measuring it against. Secondly, they must be specific and quantifiable, as I just showed. Okay? More of something or less of something is not a useful hypothesis to have, right? You want to know how much more, how much is meaningful. Third, you got to avoid validation, and this one's tricky, I find, for a lot of entrepreneurs, and I see this every time we teach. They'll say something like, people want our product, or people want our solution. Okay, that's selling. Okay, you really should be going more into detective mode. You're there to learn. Okay, also the inverse hypothesis cannot be ridiculous. Okay, like people want to save money. Everybody wants to save money. Okay? So the inverse of that shouldn't be true. These simple rules, while they seem obvious, and I'm not getting a lot of head nods, which tells me, yeah, Frank, they're obvious. I see entrepreneurs making this mistake every day. Okay, so the customer discovery part, okay, is also a set of experiments. Okay, don't just think of an experiment as being some kind of product that you test. Okay, so you want to think about how you conduct your interviews very carefully. Okay, and the way you do that is by getting out and talking to customers, and that's what the rest of this talk is going to be about. We strongly insist and encourage that people do them in person, and the simple reason for that is when you're on the phone with someone, you can't tell if they're looking at Facebook, doing their email, or deeply engaged in what you're saying. As Steve likes to say, you want to see their pupils dilate. You want to know, are they leaning over the table rapt by your every word? Or are they checked out and doing something else? Okay? And the goal of all this is to gain insight. We're not necessarily seeking statistical relevance. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But one thing as humans, we're naturally very good at recognizing patterns. We know it when we see it, and we say those kind of phrases all the time, and that's some of what we're looking for here. Okay, so once you formulate some good hypotheses and have committed yourself to this, the very first thing that you want to ask is, who do you want to learn from? Okay, and again, a lot of this seems really obvious, but people screw this up every day. I know Brandy's laughing because she sees people screw it up more than just about anybody out there. Okay, so it's really important that you identify who you want to talk to, and don't waste your time talking to people who are not going to give you the information you need. And in the earliest phase of your customer development efforts, okay, you want to focus on whoever your early adopters are. Have you guys seen a curve like this before? This is the technology lifecycle adoption curve popularized by Jeffrey Moore in his book Crossing the Chasm 15, 20 years ago. I'm not going to try to reiterate all that, but every startup starts small. Okay? Those who saw the plenary talks this morning, I don't remember her name, Laura, I think was her first name, talked about Facebook, right? Who were Facebook's first customers? Harvard students. Okay, Harvard students who want to know who else was dating whom. You got to figure out who are going to be your Harvard students for the very first version of your product, and focus your efforts on trying to find those early enthusiasts, and find, ultimately, to get the product market fit, to find the value proposition that neatly fits within this. But don't go talk to these people. And I'll say something I just said in the prior panel I participated in. Because if I asked all of you to tell me what's Facebook's value to you today, I'd probably get somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen different answers. Okay, and that's because the mainstream market, this market here, is actually composed of a lot of different markets. Okay, so you got to find this core group who are going to get you out of the blocks. Okay? Now, once you identify that, it's really important that you get out, when you get out of the building, that you meet people that you don't normally know. Okay, the people that you know are going to be nice and tell you things that you want to hear. Okay, and these interviews can be harmful. Okay, because they're going to give you false positives. Okay, and you want to hear the unvarnished truth from people. You want to hear people who have no relationship to protect with you, because only they'll tell you the truth, and only they will tell you that your baby is ugly. Don't shoot the messenger. It's my daughter, isn't she gorgeous?
She has your eyes.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay, so now you know who you want to talk to. If you Google ugly baby, he or she comes up. Actually, don't do it. You really don't want to see the other ones. Anyway. All right. Once you know who you want to learn from, right, then you got to figure out what is it that you want to learn. So you don't just want to talk to people. You have specific hypotheses that you want to test. So ergo, you have specific questions that you need to formulate in order to test those hypotheses. Okay? So you're not going to get hours with every prospective customer. So you want to make the most of them. And when we teach this in a classroom setting or in our accelerator, we use, again, the business model canvas to march them through the 9 different boxes and to focus each week or each month over testing a certain set of hypotheses and identify at any point in time where their riskiest assumptions are that they should test. Okay? So you want to go into those interviews knowing what it is that you want to learn. Okay, and create a script to do that. We'll talk more about that. But don't assume you understand the problem. And this is something that we all do. I do this too. You think you know why you're talking to that person already. But I'm going to illustrate a short video that my colleagues at UC Berkeley put together, and I'll talk more about this at the end, that I think illustrates this better than I can.
Thanks for meeting with me today. So I know that you're looking for toys that you can spend more time with your daughter playing, and we've designed this great toy that lets you do that. You can play with her and have fun, and you can teach her about building and circuit. So what do you think?
Well, actually, that's not the kind of toy I'm looking for. I like toys that she can play with by herself because I'm pretty busy. I don't want to be showing her how to do every single step along the way. I have other things that I need to do. Oh.
You don't want to look like that. No more than you want to look at the baby. So don't fall into that trap. Okay? You want to keep it as open-ended as possible. So as you go in to those customer interviews, you gotta resist the urge to sell. And it's really funny, I was talking about this with someone earlier. When we teach this to scientists and engineers as part of the I-Corps program, these are the geekiest geeks in the country that the NSF funds. Okay, these are people who cannot look at their own shoes, let alone your shoes, God forbid, in your eyes. Okay? And they go out and all they want to do is sell their technology. And you gotta fight that urge. No demos, no presentations. And invariably one of them will say, well, what about my intellectual property? If you're at risk of compromising your intellectual property, you're selling. Okay, so you gotta resist that urge. Okay, remember, you're there to learn. Okay, and you wanna get stories from people. You want them to be reflective, not forward-looking, not try to predict what they're gonna do, but tell you about what they've done. Okay, tell you about a time when they had that problem before and how they tried to solve it, where they learned about that potential solution, what they liked, what they didn't like. Where you really, and I'll say this again later, you want to be in listen mode. Maybe popping in, oh, why do you say that? Or really, how did that make you feel? And let them just go. Okay? So asking open-ended questions to learn about their problems and how they solve them today is the way to go. Be that annoying kid who asks why again. Okay, someone once said you can get to the root of any issue by asking why 5 times. You probably can get pretty damn close to it with 3 whys. Okay? Because we don't even often know why we do certain things until we stop and think about it, and asking why is a great way to unlock that. And I really strongly encourage you to create a guide, or encourage the people that you're trying to teach this to create a guide. Not a script, a guide. And make sure that there's 3 or 5 really key questions that are part of this experiment, that you have those so you can follow those, but that you also give yourself the freedom and flexibility to follow your nose. Okay? And follow your instincts. Is when you hear a juicy tidbit, go deep on it. Okay, now, Brandy's going to be giving a talk about using LinkedIn to assist with finding customer discovery interviews tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 2 p.m.
Tomorrow at 2 p.m. So here's a primer, but she's the master of this. Okay? One is, as I said earlier, you don't want to talk to your friends. Okay, you want to talk to people who have at least 1 degree of separation away from you. Okay? LinkedIn is a really, really, really powerful tool for this. And even if you're just on it, if you start doing keyword searches and look at who knows who, you're going to find there's a treasure trove of people out there. And while it may be difficult to get to some of those people, they're out there, and as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to be persistent and hustle and pushy and aggressive, and you will get to them. It's also critical you make referrals happen. Okay, we encourage entrepreneurs to get 2 referrals out of every interview they do. Have a good meeting? Who else has this problem? Do you know anyone else in your industry or someone else you can connect me with? And encourage them to make the introductions right away. Sometimes they'll walk you down the hall and introduce you to a colleague. Sometimes they'll send an email on the spot. Sometimes they'll give you a phone number and say, use my name. Okay? And that can grow to a large number very, very quickly. We also encourage people to get creative and use what one of my colleagues likes to call recruiting hacks. Okay, if you're trying to interview a certain type of consumer, find out when there's going to be a lot of them in one place. Like if you want to talk to women, find out when there's going to be a sale at a store that attracts those kind of people, and interview them when they're online while they're waiting to get in. Okay, fish where the fish are. Okay, someone once asked Jesse James, or some famous criminal, why he robbed banks. He says, that's where the money is. Well, you want to go where your customers are. Okay? And you want to do it in the wild. So, putting aside what I just said about finding them in line, if you're especially in an enterprise context, ideally you want to interview people where they work. Okay, so you can understand the context in where they're having these problems that you're trying to solve for them. Okay, maybe they can even show you a hack of a solution that they made up themselves. And when you stop and think about it, we come up with our own solutions all the time. Okay, going back about 15 years ago, when I was working in the telecom field, and we were trying to fund a startup that was going to make software tools to help network operators like AT&T and Verizon manage their network assets. I was talking to a competitor, and I asked them who they thought their biggest competitor was, and they said Microsoft. I'm like, Microsoft? They don't make a product for this. And they said, oh yeah, Excel and Access databases. So people are coming up with their own solutions. Okay, you want to see those. You'll learn a lot from those. Also, remember, be brief. Tell people you want to be brief. Tell people you want to talk to them for 15 minutes, and if it's going well, you'll find yourself still sitting there an hour later. But structure it so that you can get something meaningful. Don't do 10 minutes of small talk and then 5 minutes of meaningful talk. Okay, remember, enterprise customers are people too. Hospitals don't buy anything. Universities don't buy anything. Okay, people in specific roles in those businesses buy things. So you want to get ultimately to those specific people. Okay, but you're going to have to network to get them. So who here said they're in a university? Raise your hand again. So you folks are lucky. Because whenever we teach this in the university context, we always tell them to play the student or researcher card. Okay, because if you call me up and you say, hi, I'm Susan, I'm from startup so-and-so, and we're working on, click. Okay, but you say, hi, I'm Susan, I'm a student at NYU, and we're doing research in, I'm like, all right, fine, I'll help her. Okay, the likelihood of someone helping you, it goes up in order of magnitude. So I'm not telling you to lie, but if you can figure out a way to position this as doing research, don't say market research. Okay, that's, for some reason, we hate that word. Those are people who ask us those annoying surveys, and they call us during dinner time. I'm a researcher. If you're affiliated with a program like the National Science Foundation, gosh, that sounds highfalutin, say it. Okay? You don't have to literally show them your card, but play the card. Okay? That's my visual. Okay. Now that you know who you want to talk to, you know what you want to learn, you figured out how to find them, now you need to make sure you conduct an effective interview. Okay, so some tips on that. Yes?
One question regarding the interview persons. So in the enterprise context, would you ask users or deciders?
Both. So the question was, in an enterprise context, would you use users or deciders? I'd say you want to talk to users, buyers, influencers, recommenders, everybody in the... So the way I use the term, admittedly, customer a little sloppily. Okay, when I say customer, I mean everyone in the ecosystem of people between you and your end user. Okay, so if you were selling to a hospital or into a hospital, for example, a physician, a nurse, or some kind of clinician may be your end user, or maybe even the patient. But I guarantee you, almost none of them are actually making the decision to use your product. Okay, no more than, anyone get a laptop assigned by them, by their IT organization or their company? Right, okay, that's going the way of the dodo bird, but you're the user, but you were not the buyer. And so the considerations that the buyer has are likely very different than the considerations a user has. And to successfully get your product in the market, you need to understand all of those, as well as those of the recommender and influencer and other people in that continuum. Does that answer your question? All right. So I'm not a psychologist, but does everyone know what the term confirmation bias is? You hear what you want to hear, okay? And we sometimes ask leading questions so that we can hear what we want to hear. You got to be very careful of that, because it's very difficult to be self-aware of that. So I'll say it as I'll say in a bit. You got to practice this a little bit. You will get better with it. Okay? You always want to do your interviews in person, as I said. Skype or Google Hangout, whatever your technology of choice, is a good second. I strongly discourage you from doing phone interviews. Okay? And do them one at a time, meaning one person on the other end. Okay, you can have two of you. I think that's a good practice, so one of you can take notes, and one of you can do the interview. Do you have a question?
No, it's fine.
Just an itchy hand?
Yeah.
But because you don't want to start to look like a focus group when there's all kinds of issues then of groupthink and other problems. Okay. As I said earlier, you want to get subjects to tell a story, and you really want to look for those solutions that they've come up with themselves. Okay, you got it, because this will help broaden your thinking about.
It's 1 o'clock.
Thank you. About your solution. Okay, there was a team I was working with who had a hemostatic gel. It's a fancy term for a gel that stops bleeding. And it worked in like 3 seconds. It was pretty amazing stuff. And when I asked them about who their competition was, they said they didn't have any. And it turns out there were other gels and foams on the market that they weren't aware of. But I said to them, I said, really? I said, so there's people bleeding all over hospitals as we speak right here, and they can't stop it? And so, no, gauze and pressure was their competition, which is almost free. and a nearly universal skill. Okay, that's, competitively speaking, that's a challenge. Okay, once they start to frame it in that context, they realize, okay, they need to find a niche in the market where the cost of their solution, which was not terribly expensive, but a hell of a lot more expensive than gauze and pressure, made sense. And so, you know, liver surgery. Oh, fabulous. Can you just pass one out to everybody? It's just a blank piece of paper. And get a writing instrument or borrow one from a friend while I'm talking. All right. You know, it's also really important that you understand that where this problem lies in their priority. Is this a hair on fire problem, or is this a problem that, yeah, I can live with it, it's not that big of a deal? Okay? So ask them, how often does this problem have? Is this a, I would do anything to solve this, or something else? Okay? You want to follow your nose, follow your instincts. When you hear or key in on something, drill down on that, and then listen. And whatever STFU stands for. And it's also, I strongly encourage you, as I said already, have someone else take notes. Okay, I have a great video on this, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to show it to you. But it's really easy to trip each other up when you start to talk over each other or start to inadvertently correct each other because you didn't like the way your colleague answered the question. One of you takes notes, one of you asks the questions.
What's your take on recording it?
Recording it is fine as long as you tell the person that you want to record it, but if you're going to do 100 interviews, the chances of you listening to them are slim. So don't use recording as a substitution for taking notes.
How do you feel about Skype as a replacement for in person?
It's when you cannot get there in person, I mean, if you don't have the budget to travel all over the country and talk to your customers, it's a good second, it's a second best. Okay? But if someone's in your neighborhood, figure out a way, or in your city or in your region, it's worth the trip. Because even Skype, we lose things in a certain amount of the body language is lost. We don't really see all of what they're doing. And also, a Skype call seems longer than an in-person meeting. Right? A half an hour on Skype seems like a lot of video conference, whereas a half an hour in person seems like a brief meeting. Okay? So some pro tips. It's worthwhile to practice. There's this you can do with practice with a friend, throw out the data. Because you'll find, it's just kind of like, remember job interviewing? How you sucked at your first interview? Okay, this is a different thing, but there's similarities there. And you get better with, you learn how to, in this case you're asking the questions rather than answering them, but you learn the questions that work. Okay? I said no phone calls, definitely no emails, no focus groups, and no surveys. Okay, surveys are great for facts. If I want to know how many men are in the room and how many women in the room, what the age distribution is, the income distribution, great. Surveys are awesome for that. But I want to know how you feel about this or how high of a priority a different problem is and why that is and why you feel that way. Surveys are useless for that. Okay?
How about as a precursor, though, to this, right? So as a just, getting verbatim comments on...
I would actually flip it around. I would say if you want, a survey can be, once you know who your target customer is, and then you want data at scale, then you can very efficiently survey, you need, purchasing agents at hospitals, well then you can just send a survey to them. Okay, whereas before that, you're not going to know exactly who to send it to, and you're probably going to send it to the wrong people, and therefore you're going to have wasted data. Don't do your first interview with your dream customer. If Goldman Sachs is the company that you want to buy your product, don't do your first interview with Goldman Sachs for the same reason I said, to practice. Okay? Being an entrepreneur means being aggressive and persistent. There's a fine line between aggressive, persistent, and stalking. Okay? Try not to cross it. Flatter your subjects. Someone I know likes to tell people, I heard you're the smartest person in the industry. Can I talk to you for 15 minutes? I'd say yes. But also be transparent. Okay, tell them you're there to learn. You want to understand the problem. You're not there on a sales call. Okay, we naturally, the interviewee is going to think you're making a sales call. Tell them that you're not. Tell them you're there to learn. But at the same token, follow up and stay in touch. Okay, because today's interviewer can be tomorrow's customer. And ask them if you can stay in touch. Many of them will say yes. So this is John Maida, the former dean of the Rhode Island School of Design, who has a quote that I love. It says, "It's grueling listening to customer feedback, and if it isn't, you're probably doing it wrong." Okay, which is a nice way of saying get used to hearing things that you don't want to hear. And it's hard to do. It's another reason to do it in teams.
Hey, Frank,
Hey, Brandy.
can you tell me who said that again?
John Maida, M-A-E-D-A.
Thank you.
You're welcome. He's now a partner at Klein & Perkins. All right, so here's the exercise that I want to do. This is why you have the piece of paper. I'm just going to put some of this into practice. But you don't have to get up unless you're sitting more than 3 seats away from someone. All right, I want each of you to think about your last greater than $100 purchase. Okay, it could be way more than $100. And there's no magic to 100, but we're just looking for some kind of something that wasn't, if you're really wealthy, then make it your last greater than $1,000 purchase. I'm looking for something that was not on a whim. Okay, something that you thought about. Okay? And I want you to write that in clear, legible, big handwriting across the top of your page. Okay, big enough meaning you can still leave at least 3/4 of the page blank. Either. Don't spend too much time thinking about it. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Do you mean without saying what the description is? What
No, write what it was.
Okay.
If it was an Apple Watch, write Apple Watch. If it was a Tesla, write a Tesla model, whatever. If it was a pair of black Echo loafers, write black Echo loafers. Like these. All right. Echo is not a sponsor. Neither is Apple or Tesla. All right, now, I want everyone to just find a partner, preferably the person sitting closest to them, but someone that you're going to have to talk to that person in a minute and swap. Okay? Take 30 seconds to do this. You don't have to start talking yet, just find your partner. Anyone doesn't have a partner? All right, find each other.
I'm trying to my head.
All right, well, they're finding each other. All right, now I want each of you to create an interview guide based on the other person's purchase. Okay, you don't have to use these questions, but these are some sample questions. Explain what you bought and why. If any of you did this in a business context, maybe make sure that when you answer that question, you explain what role you're playing, right? Are you a purchasing agent? Are you a doctor? Are you a whatever, train conductor, as opposed to just a consumer? What was the process from desire to acquisition? What other options and alternatives did you consider? How did you decide to buy it? What did you consult? And how did you decide where to buy it? Those are example questions. Okay, I want to take 3 minutes and have each of you come up with your own script. And write it down on the paper because you're going to put this to work in a minute. Okay?
Frank, is that for the...
Yeah, so you're going to now interview them about the purchase that's on the top of your page.
Okay, so we're going to interview
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think we wrote down some questions. But
You want to understand, that's a good question. The question was, what's the purpose of this? Is you want to understand why they made, how, when, why, where they made that purchase. So that's why I kind of gave these kind of sample questions. You want to understand why they bought that thing. Okay, so take 2 more minutes to do that. Actually, it doesn't have to be 5 questions. It can be 3 or 4. Don't go more than 5 because you won't have enough time. By the way, if you like this exercise, it is in the back of Talking with Humans. And 1 more minute. All right. Now what I'd like you to do is you can pick who does it first. One of you to interview the other. Don't worry, you're going to get to swap. Okay? It's going to get noisy in here, so get close. I'd offer gum. But actually, we're going to do this in 4 minutes. Okay? So go. switch. Whoever was the interviewer is now the interviewee and vice versa. And you have another 5 minutes. So how was that? Was that anything like you expected or a little bit different? Someone shout it out.
It was very informative.
How so? What was the purchase?
We started with a pair of shoes.
Okay.
We got to kind of like the 3 most important factors in making that decision. So I thought it was super informative. I don't know how.
Would you have guessed those answers?
Just from pair of shoes?
Yeah.
I would have guessed those answers. I would have guessed two of the three, I think.
Okay, what was the one you were wrong about?
I wouldn't have guessed like craftsmanship of quality. Like I would have guessed quality, but I don't think I've got to that level of like it has to be like obviously visibly handmade or something.
All right.
Yeah, what was interesting is that Peter's was about choosing a road bike, a bike, which is my passion. So I thought, great, I've got this. I know everything about cycling. So I wrote,
you hear that? He said he's a biker too, but he knew everything about cycling. So what did you learn?
Well, so I thought. Because I wrote what I thought would be 3 really insightful questions, and his first answer rendered the second 2 completely useless. But we agreed to go for a ride sometime, so.
Good. Anyone else? Yeah, back there.
My questions were unnecessary. I was able to ask one question and then one or two broad and probing questions, but we filled up 5 minutes of talking with 1.5 questions.
At the risk of embarrassing your co-interviewer, who found something really surprising?
Yeah, I was very surprised to learn that a person could spend so much research on buying one pair of jeans.
Anyone else? Good, you opened the door, good. Come on, let's embarrass each other, come on. Yeah.
He bought the shoes but didn't need to buy any.
He bought the shoes but didn't need to buy any, okay. Wait, so okay, well actually let's go there for a second. So why did he buy it?
Because I like them.
Because you liked them?
Yeah.
Okay, did you just accept that or?
I guess I did, yeah. Was it really spontaneous? Yeah, spontaneous. Yeah, it's a personal choice.
So, okay. Up here?
Well, I learned an interesting customer insight that he's shopping for a car and he ended up buying the first car that he was researching. So part of like convenience and price influence it, but it's also, you know, it's kind of good to know if you're a say car salesperson, if the customer already went through the door, your chances of increasing closing that deal.
You know, actually, there's another exercise that we do when we do it with a car, because cars are really interesting, right? We don't just buy them for functional reasons. If you really stop and think about it a second, there's a lot of emotional and social considerations, right? How cool you're going to look, how comfy. It's not just about getting from A to B. I mean, that's the primary use of a car, right? Is the lady's going to like me in this car? I mean, no, seriously. I mean, there's a lot of consideration. That's why actually I said something that was more than $100. So who has knowing this, having done this once, would anyone rewrite their interview script? Raise your hand. Okay, why?
Two of my questions were based on an assumption I made that turned out to be wrong.
What was the assumption?
The assumption that the purchase was a trip to Chicago, and I assumed that there had been a choice about where to go, but it was more of a, the location was predetermined. It would have been go or not go, as opposed to where to go.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
You spoke already.
Yeah.
Come on. In back? No? All right, you.
I was surprised how quickly I asked follow-up closed-ended questions, just like spontaneously.
Such as?
Did you, and of course that led to a yes/no question.
A yes/no question.
Question was, but it was quickly just, I realized that that's what doing it.
Was this a useful exercise? Why? I see a lot of heads nodding. Why?
Yeah, there's an insight there that, I mean, it's fairly minor, but I think there's more to dig into. So he bought a tent. He bought a second tent, right? So why do you need 2 tents? Well, the people that I want to go camping with aren't campers, so the only way to get them to go is for me to have a tent, supply them with a tent, right? So it's just fun, you know, it's not kind of a simple thing, you would expect an insight, but I think you could actually dig into there further, and Dix has a mark, you know, can go back after people and hit on that, right? So.
For me, this exercise illustrates just the energy in looking into someone's peoples, and I mean, we're all so interested. There's so many things to learn.
You are, as Bugs Bunny said, humans are the most interesting people.
I think it's can be difficult to, when you do this, when you do this exercise, you start to see patterns. And I think it's difficult when you go to interviews beyond that, not to get stuck in the patterns, but really start to keep on listening and get the stories out. Is it?
You're preaching to the choir. All right. In the interest of time, we only have about 5 minutes left. Let's move on. So I said some of this already. You definitely should have someone take notes. Definitely write down the key ahas as they happen. As I like to say, the half-life of an insight is like less than 30 seconds. We learned this in college, right? It's important to take notes so you remember the important things that the professor said. With your customers, it's just as true. Write down those important things. I guarantee you will not remember. If you're anything like me, you will not remember all of it. Note the questions that work and use them again. No, I don't necessarily recommend that people record, because really, if you do 100 interviews, you're not going to go back and listen to 100 hours worth of interviews. But take pictures or video of things that will remind you of the setting. Okay, especially if they had, that solution hack or that MVP, take a picture of it. It'll be useful. Or to take a short video. If they said something that like blows your mind, say, can you say that again? And capture it on video. Capture those key insights, write them down. And I think to your point, right, it's important that you make sense for it. You're doing pattern recognition. You don't want to end up like these schmucks. And like I said, facts are interesting, but there's lots of easy ways to capture facts. Insights are hard, or at least more time consuming. And that's really your goal. Okay? It's important though that you be honest with yourself. Don't, jump to conclusions or be too quick to validate or disprove. Okay, but you'll know it when you see it. Okay, but just because 3 people said yes doesn't necessarily mean, if you get 3 affirmative yeses, okay, then go talk to 10 more. If you get 13 yeses in a row, and I'm not saying yes, they want your product, but yes, they have this problem or whatever your hypothesis. Remember, you're not trying to sell. You're there to test your hypotheses. Okay? You also, and this is the tricky part, this is really where it is the art of customer discovery, is you want to find out people's hidden motivations. This is why I asked you at the why. Okay, why did you want to buy those pair of shoes? And ask why again. I'd also encourage you, and for those of you who teach as well, is you really have to give people the freedom to experiment. That's why it's called experimenting. And don't worry about picking the wrong market. Okay? Because the good news is if you waste 10 interviews with 10 people that invalidate that they're your target customer segment, thank God. Right? Because the converse of that is shipping a product assuming that they're all going to buy it and then none of them buy it. So pat yourself on the back when you pick the wrong market in this phase. And the depth, remember, the depth of understanding, the better you understand your customers, the better you can get into their shoes, the more you're going to understand them and all those motivations, issues, challenges, and needs that you need them to unpack. Now I talk about this term insight, right? And so I thought I'd share the dictionary definition of insight, which is the capacity to gain an accurate or deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. Hey, that's nice. But the definition I really like was something that Mike Krieger, the founder of Instagram, said, was an insight is something you're so excited about you tell strangers on the train. Right? Like when something happens, you learn something, you realize something, you have an epiphany, that aha moment, that you feel like you have to tell someone. That's an insight. Right? When you discover something and you want to go back and tell your co-founder, oh my God, chances are that's an insight. Okay, so this is the critical part of the process. Remember, this was the first of the 4 steps. Okay, so this is the foundational work as an entrepreneur that everything else will build upon. So it's really important you do this well and you do it thoroughly. Okay, because remember I said half of your assumptions going into this are wrong, more than half of them. Okay, so better to vet this through some very quick, cheap, and inexpensive customer interviews than by building and shipping a product and finding out you're wrong. Okay, some final pro tips. You really want to focus on actual behaviors. We are, as humans, we are terrible at predicting our own futures, our own purchase intent. We lie to ourselves all the time. Okay, so we're definitely going to lie to someone else. Okay, so get people to focus on actual behaviors, not speculation or abstract feelings. Remember I said if they've made an MVP, ask to see it, listen, don't talk. Another technique that a colleague of mine likes to use is to parrot things back or say something back incorrectly. So let me see I got this straight. So you're saying that my pants are black? No, I said they were blue. Oh, okay, got it. Okay? It's a way to make sure that you're really hearing them correctly and when they hear it back from you. Okay? Make sure you leave every interview with at least 2 introductions, 2 names, 2 phone numbers, 2 email addresses. Write up your notes ASAP and avoid premature conclusions. This is the book. It's all of about 80 or 90 pages, including exercises and a kind of a fable at the beginning of it. It's a really quick and easy read. The PDF and EPUB or iBook versions are free. We charge 99 cents for the Kindle version because Amazon makes us charge something and they get all of it. And the print version all goes to the printer and for shipping. So it's something that we want. We stole a lot of this from other people and we wanted to give back to the community. Also, my friends at UC Berkeley, who run an I-Core node over there in Berkeley, jointly with UCSF and Stanford, also created a whole series of videos. You saw one of them, or you saw a piece of one of them. There's about 30 or 40 videos in total. Some have Steve Blank, some are these kind of role-playing like you saw there. They're really, really good. And the name, well, each one of them is 2 to 4 minutes. They're really, really helpful. A lot of do's and don'ts, best practices in customer discovery interview. So I know we're 3 minutes over right now. I'm happy to take questions for the group. We'll probably got to clear out of here in 5 to 10 minutes in any event, but I'm also happy to take it outside.